Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1072 for September 1st, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
Mark, I get calls at least a couple times a week, on a call and email. Give me reason to hope. Should I just close up shop now? I just don't know how to make it.
Over the last year, an average of one U.S. craft distiller a week has closed its doors. There are many factors at play here, but the biggest dilemma craft distillers face is getting their spirits to market. Margie Lehrman is the CEO of the American Craft Spirits Association and is one of the biggest advocates of letting craft distillers sell their spirits directly to consumers. Right now, that's only legal in 10 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. I'll talk with Margie about the problems craft distillers are facing on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella from Jewers here. The 2024 U.S. Open Championship may have ended, but you can still get your hands on the whiskey created to honor it. The new Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Trust me, a whiskey you don't want to miss. More details coming up.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. It's not just craft distillers who are facing economic headwinds. The big boys are struggling as well. Pernod Ricard saw its organic revenue decline by 1% year over year for the fiscal year ending June 30th from the previous year. Profits were up by 1.5% on strong sales in mature and emerging markets, while the U.S. and China are still posing challenges. Sales in the U.S. were off by 9%, but the company cited growth for Jefferson's bourbon and stable sales for Jameson. Sales in China were off by 10%, and Pernod executives cited continuing weak consumer sentiment there, along with a challenging economic environment. The company's Chivas Brothers unit would have reported sales gains had it not been for the pullout from the Russian market and showed sales gains for the second 6 months of the year. Meanwhile, Brown-Forman missed analyst estimates for its first quarter performance on weaker demand for its whiskeys. Sales for Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, and Old Forester were off by 5% from a year ago as consumers cut back their spending on higher-priced products. The company earned 41 cents a share during the quarter. Analysts had forecast earnings of 46 cents a share. CEO Lawson Whiting said the results were in line with his team's expectations and reaffirmed the company's guidance for fiscal 2025 results. Wes Henderson didn't stay retired for very long. The co-founder of Angel's Envy Bourbon is building a new $93 million distillery in Versailles, Kentucky. His Saga Spirits has already applied for labels for 2 whiskeys to be sold under the True Story brand name. Henderson bought the iconic Kentucky Castle near Versailles last year, and according to the Lexington Herald-Leader, plans upgrades there as well to the event space, restaurant, and whiskey bar. Groundbreaking is set for this fall. Ireland's Connacht distillery has been sold to Terroirs Distillers, which also owns Scotland's Tullibardine Distillery and the Highland Queen blended Scotch brand. The distillery had been on the block for a couple of years. No word on the purchase price. In other news, Bowmore is celebrating the distillery's 250th anniversary with a major branding redesign and 2 new whiskey collections. Gone are the white labels in favor of black as an homage to the legendary Black Bowmore whiskies. The new branding first appears on the new Bowmore Sherry Oak collection with 12, 15, 18, and 21-year-old whiskeys matured in combinations of Oloroso and PX sherry casks. The new Bowmore Appellations series also has 4 whiskeys. In the Travel Retail Exclusive series, they're finished in Bordeaux, Burgundy, Port, and Sauterne wine casks. The new whiskeys will be available starting this month in select markets and at the distillery on Islay. The Dalmore has unveiled a new Distillery Select series with 3 single malts. The Distillery Select 2009 vintage sherry cask finish is a 15-year-old whiskey finished in Gonzales Bias sherry casks. It'll sell for £300 a bottle. The 2007 vintage is finished in a combination of Amarone and port casks, and the 17-year-old whiskey will sell for £1,000 a bottle. The series concludes with the 24-year-old 2000 vintage Calvados finish, with just 383 bottles available worldwide at £5,000 each. Sister distillery Jura has launched a new limited edition series as well, with Perspective No. 1. It's a twist on the old Juroc's own single malt with maturation in ex-bourbon casks and finishing in Oloroso sherry casks. It's available now in the UK, Europe, and select Asian markets. There's no word on pricing. Glencadam has unveiled 2 new cask-finished single malts. Riserva di Amarone is finished in Amarone Italian wine casks, while Riserva de Madeira is finished in, you guessed it, Madeira wine casks from Portugal. Both are priced at £47 a bottle in the UK. In the U.S., Heaven Hill has unveiled this year's Parker's Heritage Collection whiskey. It's not a bourbon, but a 14-year-old malt whiskey distilled from a mash bill of 65% malted barley and 35% corn back in 2009. The whiskey was transferred to reconstructed heavily toasted cognac casks and finished for 4 months. It'll be available in limited amounts starting this month for $169.99 a bottle, and as in previous years, part of the proceeds will be donated to the ALS Association in Parker Beam's memory. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Freddie Noah's been busy with 2 new whiskeys unveiled this week, a new Booker's Bourbon series with older 8 to 14-year-old barrels in the blend, as opposed to the 6 to 7-year-old whiskeys used in the regular Booker's releases. It's called the Reserves series and will carry a price tag of $129.99 a bottle. Freddie also unveiled the newest Little Book release, the Infinite Edition 1, with whiskeys distilled by his grandfather Booker No, Freddie, and his father Fred No. This year's whiskey will form the foundation for future releases, with Freddie adding some whiskey to the blend each year for a different taste profile. Edition 1 will be priced at $199.99 a bottle. Redemption Whiskey is out with a unique rye whiskey. Surly Straight Rye uses a variation on the French Surly winemaking process, in which backset coming off the stills is added to the spirit before it goes into the cask. It's said to be the first whiskey of its kind and will sell for $59.99 a bottle. Wyoming Whiskey has released its 4th National Parks Edition bourbon. This year's edition celebrates Yellowstone National Park and the legendary Mammoth Hot Springs. It's a 5-year-old bourbon that will help raise funds for Yellowstone Forever, the park's official charitable partner. It released this week in Wyoming and will be available in Colorado, California, and other markets this coming month. New Riff Distilling has released the 2nd edition of its Sour Mash Single Malt Whiskey. It uses the same 3 varietal mash bills as last year's debut version, but uses older 9-year-old barrels in the blend along with Madeira cask matured malt whiskey. It went on sale Friday at the distillery in Newport, Kentucky, and will be available at retailers in the coming weeks for $69.99 a bottle. Finally, Compass Box's latest limited edition release is a throwback to the 2016 release of The Circus. The Traveling Circus is peat-heavy with whiskeys from Talisker and Kalila in the blend, along with Speyside sherry matured malts and grain whiskey from the closed Port Dundas distillery. It's only available right now at the airport shops at Los Angeles' LAX airport and New York's JFK airport, but will receive wider release in the coming weeks. The price tag is $188 a bottle. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
It's a busy week, so let's open up the calendar and see what's going on around the world of whiskey. The Whiskey X Nashville is this Thursday night, along with the Michter's Speakeasy Night at the Fraser History Museum in Louisville, Kentucky. Maltstock is this coming weekend in Nijmegen, the Netherlands, along with Spirit of Speyside Distilled in Elgin, Scotland, Whiskies of the World in Denver, and I hope to see some of you at the Whiskey Show in London. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival runs from September 13th through the 15th in Bardstown. The 14th is the Whiskey Show in Brisbane, Australia. Moonshine University in Louisville has a barrel aging workshop on the 16th, and Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville hosts a Horse Soldier Bourbon Dinner on the 18th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. It's hard to say whether the craft distilling boom is over or just facing a temporary setback. More than 60 U.S. craft distilleries have closed in the past year because of a wide variety of factors. There's inflation and the general economic malaise that has spread across the U.S., but the biggest factor is the lack of a route to market. The so-called three-tier system has a bottleneck in the second tier, the distributors who buy from the distilleries and sell to retailers, restaurants, and bars. The distributor ranks have consolidated in recent years to the point where just 3 companies dominate the industry nationwide, and when there's a choice between pushing high-volume products from large distillers or taking a chance on distributing a craft distiller's spirits, the choice is almost always the high-volume products. In fact, there's a federal antitrust investigation going on now into whether the distributors have too much control over the marketplace. One of the things that could help break that logjam is direct-to-consumer shipping, allowing distillers to ship their products directly to consumers and avoid the middleman. Margie Lehrman is the CEO of the American Craft Spirits Association and one of the biggest advocates for so-called DTC shipping. We talked the other day on a Zoom call. Let's first explain how we got to this point where craft distillers are in crisis.
Great question, Mark. I think a number of factors. As craft distillers continue to grow by way of actual distilleries and brands, put lots more product available to go into the marketplace without additional store shelves being added, without additional distributors picking up product. At the time that our brands, our distilleries were growing, the industry having a bright future, what we were seeing is through mergers, through consolidation, fewer distributors, not only who would be available to pick up product, but also who would be available to pick up craft in terms of their portfolio. So I think that plays into it for sure. Other reasons that are cited, the distillers just don't have the same marketing dollars as some of the larger brands. So to try and get the attention of the wholesalers and even consumers, that obviously hits. On top of that, you have what is being experienced right now throughout the country, remnants of COVID, kind of having gotten through that with tasting rooms being opened back up. Not having the same kind of foot traffic. We're hearing the same thing from restaurants. The on-premise is a little bit off from where it used to be. You couple that with shelf space in retail, so you've got the on and off-premise both kind of in a different model right now. And then you add inflation. You add consumer also perhaps preferences. Switching. We all are reading that the non-alc category is one that is growing by way of importance. And then throw into that just in terms of the overall economic marketplace, we've got that thing called inflation. So I think having those items that I just mentioned. The other thing is just some of the trade practice areas that are perhaps something that we'll be paying much closer attention to, because in this battle to gain shelf space, we remain the little dog. And at times it really is that kind of David and Goliath situation. We've got these small businesses who are really just fighting.
How did we get to the point where wineries can sell direct to consumer in 47 states in the District of Columbia and distilleries can only sell in 8 states and DC?
Well, as of today, Mark, the good news is with the rules and regs that will be rolling out, New York just added. As of today, the governor signed the legislation. She just sent out a press release. So New York State now has direct to consumer shipping, and we couldn't be more thrilled for our distiller friends there in New York State who fought long and hard to make that happen. Alaska just promulgated its set of rules and regulations, so that will be opening. So within a few months, we've got now 10 states, which means we've got 40 left to tackle. How did wine do it? Wine organized how many years ago under Free the Grapes, which was also a consumer advocacy-based effort to get consumers involved. You know, Mark, that traditionally spirits have always been treated differently from wine, whether we're looking at tax credits, whether we're looking at excise tax, whether we're looking at shipping methods, delivery methods. And in part, I will respond that wine first. They got organized. They educated legislators at both the state, federal level. And as a result, I think in terms of education, when you express to those we elect common sense solution to problems, they're more willing to listen. And in the case of direct-to-consumer shipping, it is definitely a common sense solution to create that distribution on-ramp so wholesalers, because there are fewer, know which products have legs, which ones work. We would never expect that second tier to take every product just because it's being made, but we would expect to have a fair fighting chance for the product to be recognized and put into mainstream marketplace. And right now, that just doesn't exist.
And the 3-tier system dates back to the end of Prohibition.
That's correct.
90 years.
That's correct.
And was a system that was basically set up to keep tied houses out of the market.
That's right. That's right. So a lot of the problems that existed right after Prohibition simply don't exist now. And with 50 different states, and sometimes within those states, having a different set of regulations, it is so difficult for these small businesses who on average have fewer than 12 employees to complete the government forms. In one case, I was told that the federal government forms for a small business manufacturer, it takes a good 2.5 days per month just to complete the forms. Well, that's absurd. That means really in the case of craft distillers, instead of what? But I think going back to direct-to-consumer shipping, wine has showed us that the sky doesn't fall, that these businesses can still survive. When I say these businesses, I'm talking about specifically that second tier, that it hasn't eroded their market such that they still don't have a viable business entity picking up wine and delivering to both retail as well as on-premise.
The Wine and Spirits Wholesalers Association of America goes nuts every time somebody mentions direct-to-consumer shipping of spirits and says the sky is going to fall, underage drinkers are going to get access to whiskey and spirits that they shouldn't be getting access to, and essentially it's treating the 3-tier system as motherhood apple pie in the American flag almost. What do we do to get past that and to get direct-to-consumer shipping?
Yeah, we've both heard those arguments. Take exception to what has been suggested. Let's just take the case of product that's tainted in protecting us all from drinking bad product. I maintain that every craft distiller goes through the exact same process that every large brand does, meaning formula approval, meaning colas, meaning TTB, the DSP license and permitting, state permitting. So they go through the same rigorous application process in addition to when they create products, the same kind of internal controls, listing it with the FDA. So I actually recently posed, please point to the U.S. products that you have saved consumers, because on the other side, okay, maybe imports coming in, they do have a role there. Maybe there are tainted products coming from India or Mexico, but that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about craft spirits. So that argument really doesn't fly. Rather than go by the counterpoint, I will suggest that I think that there is a fear of really just opening up the box, that if you give a little, it may blow up to something bigger. ACSA, craft distillers, have never suggested we want to tear down that second tier. Many of our members, if not the majority who have access, rely on wholesalers to help push their product. In some cases, it's not quite so successful, because if you've got a brand on the shelf that you know sells, of course you're going to be pushing that brand over craft. But I think that there are probably creative ways that we could solve this and kind of get past it. In terms of direct-to-consumer shipping, I think it could be a win for everyone, including that second tier, if we sit down and really start to chip away at what could potentially work for all parties involved.
Give me an idea of how that works from your point of view.
Well, could there potentially be, for those distilleries that produce, let's take a craft spirits member, anyone who is a member of ACSA, 750,000 proof gallons removed from bond. Are members there? No, they're not even close to that. I'm talking about those who are just really in the market right now and really just trying to survive. Mark, I get calls at least a couple times a week, not a call, an email. Give me reason to hope. Should I just close up shop now? I just don't know how to make it. And in part, it breaks my heart because some of these brands have won awards. I'm in the DC area. 1-8 recently closed. Magnus closed. There's other distilleries have been doing this for a while. 1-8, in fact, is a case in point. It just got too difficult. And when we talk about the American dream, so many distillers said, I'm living the American dream. I get to innovate. I get to be creative. I get to provide an adult alcoholic beverage that is enjoyed. I will add responsibly. It creates that community. And then American dream is being suffocated right now. And the choke point is really just market access. And whether it's direct-to-consumer shipping that gets it into the hands of the consumer, whether it's allowing more than a 1 or 2 ounce pour at the distillery itself, whether it's allowing actual cocktail to be made at the distillery itself, whether it's allowing that consumer who wants to purchase the bottle right there and then, the distillery being able to ship it to them, as opposed to the person trying to put it into their bag and carry off. Some states don't even allow yet craft spirits to be at a market. Why not? Wine's at the market. So, Mark, you mentioned prohibition. A lot of the state laws in so many different levels still replicate a system that was built in the 30s as opposed to, what year are we now, 2024? We haven't caught up to the 20th century.
Do we need to consider breaking up the big three distributors or on antitrust grounds?
That's a really interesting question. Do we need to consider? I would say let's consider everything. It doesn't mean that the solution or the answer is yes. But at this point, if we're talking about survival, I think we need to look at every option possible to ensure that America's small business have a way to sell their product and put it into consumers' hands. You know, coming down the pike is this other thing called dietary guidelines, right? So we're not only fighting to get product there. Next, we're fighting. And by the way, that is a place where we are all unified, whether you are a manufacturer, second tier, or that third tier, on or off premise. Scientific evidence, not really seeing it. Preponderance of the evidence, not really seeing it. Transparency, not really seeing it. So stay tuned on that one. But talk about a place of common ground. I think you will see all entities united on that one.
Is there potential for using that common ground to get together on DTC and other stuff?
Yeah. In fact, Mark, I had lunch recently with Francis Crane, and I will say it was a delightful lunch. Very much enjoy his company. We do part ways in how we approach certain things. But
let's explain who Francis Crane is for our listeners who aren't familiar.
Oh, sure. Francis Crane is the CEO and president of WSWA, Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America. And I will tell you, I personally, I think Mark is a really great guy. We have a lot of different commonalities in DC. We've both been here for a while. Both enjoy sort of the politics of DC, I'm going to just say. Where I think we could find common ground is perhaps furthering discussions on DTC, but probably more hopeful in some of the other areas that may not so directly impact that second tier. Sometimes in the work that we do, Mark, it's as important for parties to remain neutral as it is for them to say, yeah, we agree with that. So we're just now beginning to explore different options with WSWA. I know that it became very public sort of in the trade press in terms of this back and forth. It was unfortunate, but what it did is it elevated the issue and just how important it is for our members, and just also how difficult it is for our members to sell to the consumer. And we do believe in consumer choice, and we definitely believe in consumer convenience done responsibly and safely.
You mentioned that you get calls from distillers each week looking for hope. How many have closed up in recent months?
That's a really good question that we're just right now, Mark, starting to get a better handle on. I've heard the number upwards of hundreds. I don't know if we're at hundreds yet, but I do know of at least 60 in the past year who have closed their shop. And they're all for a variety of reasons. But I think when you have these different challenges hitting all at the same time, you've got employees who have families that need to pay their bills. You have folks who want a career path, and if it looks dim, so your employment force is perhaps hurting, but you've also got investors that you are beholden to. And I think when people invest, they may not quite understand our industry and understand how difficult it is to have this sort of momentum. And let's be honest, I think craft spirits, the bev alcohol industry is kind of sexy, right? I mean, hey, I've got some extra money. Let's put it into this, because it's very different than investing, say, in making widgets. It's something that lives and breathes, creates a sense of community, has a romantic angle, creates a certain vibrancy and energy. And I think in terms of craft, it also has this innovation that you don't see in a lot of other economic sectors.
And they see that celebrity brand that sells for $1 billion that they want to try to get their hands on some of that money.
That's absolutely right. The other thing that I have not mentioned, and it does definitely merit attention, which is the farmers of America. Our craft distillers typically have relationships with those who produce the grain that goes into that glass bottle. And that's another area where when we think of kind of that relationship between the local ag community, the distillery, and whether we're talking about a suburban or rural distillery, city distillery, it matters who's growing their grain. It matters for the sort of the terroir, that local story. This is, we're at this crossroads right now that I think is fueling everyone who works on the advocacy for craft distillers, knowing that what we do now probably matters more than any time since this industry took effect.
Thanks to Margie Lehrman of the American Craft Spirits Association for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Oban, a deliciously smooth single malt known for its coastal charm and Highland heritage, loved by whiskey lovers worldwide. Discover Oban's full lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with a whiskey from a lost American craft distillery. Rich Grain Distilling Company in Canton, Mississippi closed in 2020, leaving behind barrels of maturing bourbon stocks. The folks at Lost Lantern blended some of Rich Grain's 5- and 7-year-old bourbon to create Mississippi Memory. It's bottled at a whopping 70% ABV, but doesn't nose or taste that strong. The nose has touches of caramel, cocoa, graham crackers, burnt popcorn, and toasted oak. The taste is dry and astringent, with clove and cinnamon notes balanced by dark chocolate, oak tannins, and hints of molasses and brown sugar. The finish is long and dry, and I'm scoring Lost Lantern's Mississippi Memory Bourbon an 89. Working through the backlog on my tasting table these days, one whiskey that fell through the cracks is the Hirsch Cask Strength Cognac Finish Bourbon. It's a 7.5-year-old bourbon finished in Hein XO cognac casks, and it's bottled at 63.5% ABV. The nose has touches of raspberry jam, subtle spices, dried fruits, and a hint of raisins. The taste is spicy and fruity with cinnamon and black pepper on top of fresh berries, figs, and raisins. The finish is long with dried fruits and lingering spices. I'm scoring the Hirsch Cask Strength Cognac Finish a 90. Finally, let's look at the new Parker's Heritage Collection whiskey from Heaven Hill. As I mentioned during the news, it's a malt whiskey finished in reconstructed heavily toasted cognac casks, and it's bottled at 53.5% ABV. The nose is warm and aromatic with molasses, ginger, honey, and a soft oakiness. The taste has notes of molasses, baking chocolate, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger with a touch of honey in the background. The finish has lingering spices with a touch of baking chocolate, and I'm scoring the 2024 Parker's Heritage Collection whiskey a 92. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,700 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Every year, Dewar's, the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, rolls out a special limited edition whiskey to celebrate that year's tournament. The 2024 championship wrapped up in June, but the 2024 Dewar's 19-year Pinehurst edition is available now, and you don't want to miss it. This year's 19-year whiskey is double-aged, then extra-matured in rye casks, offering a rich profile with notes of pear and heather honey. There's a hint of spice in there, too, along with a dusting of cinnamon and cocoa powder. It's a sensory delight for any true whiskey or golf fan. So trust me, my fellow aficionados, grab a bottle and enjoy a whiskey crafted with the same skill and precision that makes the U.S. Open legendary. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume. Imported by John Dewar & Sons, Coral Gables, Florida.
Let's open up the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. Had one more comment on last week's story about Sweden's Mackmyra distillery filing for bankruptcy. Connie Engstrad posted this on X. Whiskey industry in Sweden is working for the government with no payment, but full risk. Had a lot of comments on last week's story about Brown-Forman ending its diversity and inclusion programs under pressure from conservative activists. Juan Cruz posted this in the WhiskyCast community app, and the company thinks that is the right decision? Upsetting. Ian Bruce posted this from Australia in the app. Honestly, what is the world turning into? Canuck Sloth added this. All of these companies' shareholders might want to take a look at birth rates and how much money companies have paid in lawsuits when you don't account for basic equality, not to mention mass issues with a lack of staff due to not having diverse hiring practices and cultures. And Forestiall chimed in with this. Brown-Forman still has an article on their website saying how they have been named to the Paramount Inclusion Index. I'd never heard of that, but suppose that article will be coming down soon. Something to think about next time I'm buying a bottle anyway. If you'd like to share your opinion on this or any other whiskey-related topic, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You can also find us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey, on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Trevor Harris, Alan Ross and Amy Jackson, Pat and Dennis Booth, Alan Mooney, John MacDonald. Just a few of the growers who help to make us the biggest distillers of organic whiskey in the world. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. I shared my tasting notes for the new Parker's Heritage Collection whiskey a few minutes ago, but it's worth taking a couple of minutes to talk about its namesake, the late Parker Beam, since a whole generation of new whiskey lovers has come since his death in 2017 from ALS. Parker spent his childhood following his father Earl around Heaven Hill Distillery, where Earl became master distiller in 1946. In 1960, he went to work at the distillery and worked his way up through the ranks until 1975, when Earl retired and Parker became the master distiller. Back in 2007, long before he was diagnosed with ALS, Heaven Hill created the Parker's Heritage Collection line of annual limited edition whiskeys to honor him. Back then, he was only the third distiller to have their name on a bottle of bourbon, along with Elmer T. Lee and Jimmy Russell. After his diagnosis in early 2013, Heaven Hill started donating part of the proceeds from each year's Parker's Heritage Collection release to the ALS Association's Parker's Promise of Hope Fund. Since then, more than $1 million has been raised for ALS research and patient support. Parker Beam spent 56 years at Heaven Hill before his death at the age of 75, and he was the very first guest on the first episode of WhiskyCast back in 2005. He was a gentleman as well as a great whiskey maker, and in 2001 he was one of the first inductees into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. In 2015, the Kentucky Distillers Association named its Lifetime Achievement Award for Parker Beam. Fittingly, he was the first recipient. After that ceremony, Parker, Jimmy Russell, and I sat down for an interview. You can watch it on our YouTube channel. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from your app store. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
The 2024 release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is out now. Available at Dewars.com. Get it while you can and appreciate every double-aged rye cask finished dram. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.